The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Lily Thornton stepped down onto the sun-baked earth of Veta, Colorado, with nothing but a worn carpetbag and the dress on her back, both covered in 3 days' worth of trail dust and despair. It was late summer in 1877, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small town nestled in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Lily stood there, swaying slightly, her auburn hair falling from its pins, her pale blue eyes scanning the unfamiliar street with barely concealed panic. The letter from her cousin, Martha, had promised a position as a schoolteacher, a fresh start after the scandal that had driven her from St. Louis. But Martha was dead. The stagecoach driver had broken the news casually, as if mentioning the weather. That fever had taken Martha Pemberton and her whole family 2 weeks prior. Lily felt her knees weaken. She had nothing. No family, no prospects, and barely enough coins in her reticule to buy a single meal. The other passengers had already dispersed, eager to escape the cramped coach, leaving her standing alone in the street like a ghost no one wanted to acknowledge. "Miss, you cannot just stand there blocking the boardwalk." A woman's sharp voice cut through her daze. A severe-looking matron in black bombazine glared at her with undisguised disapproval. "I apologize," Lily murmured, stepping aside. "I was told my cousin lived here, but I have just learned that she passed. I am trying to determine where I might find lodging." The woman's expression did not soften. "Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house on 2nd Street, but she requires payment in advance. This is a respectable town, and we do not take kindly to vagrants." She swept past, her skirts raising small clouds of dust. Lily blinked back tears. She would not cry in the middle of the street. She had survived the shame of a broken engagement when her fiancé had run off with her supposed best friend. She had endured the whispers and pointed fingers in St. Louis society. She would survive this too, somehow. She picked up her carpetbag and started walking, though she had no clear destination. The town was small, just a collection of wooden buildings lining a main street, with the mountains rising dramatically in the background. A saloon, the general store, a blacksmith, a church with a modest steeple. She could hear the rhythmic clang of metal on metal from the smithy, the low murmur of men's voices from the saloon. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten since yesterday. She stopped in front of the general store, counting the coins in her reticule again, hoping they might have somehow multiplied. They had not. She had perhaps enough for a loaf of bread and maybe some cheese. The door opened as she stood there, and a tall man nearly collided with her. He caught her arm to steady her, and she looked up into a weathered, sun-bronzed face with eyes the color of aged whiskey. "Pardon me, miss," he said, his voice a low rumble. He released her arm immediately and took a step back, removing his hat. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and he had the build of a man who worked hard for his living, broad-shouldered and lean. "Did not see you there." "No harm done," Lily said, trying to muster a smile. She noticed he was watching her with a concerned expression, his gaze taking in her dusty clothes and the exhaustion that must be written all over her face. "You just arrive on the stage?" he asked. "Yes, I did. Visiting family." The simple question broke something in her, and she felt her composure crack. "I was supposed to, but they have passed, all of them. Fever." Her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. The man's expression shifted to genuine sympathy. "Martha Pemberton was your kin, my cousin." "I was to be the new schoolteacher." Lily swallowed hard. "I apologize. I should not be troubling a stranger with my circumstances." "No trouble at all, miss. Name's Mason Crawford. I have a ranch about 5 miles north of town." He studied her for a long moment, and she saw something like understanding in his eyes. You have somewhere to stay. I was going to inquire at the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson's place. He shook his head slightly. She will want 2 weeks' payment up front, and between you and me, her accommodations are barely worth the cost. Lily felt her last bit of hope crumbling. I see. Well, I shall have to make do. Mason Crawford stood there, turning his hat in his hands, clearly wrestling with some internal debate. Finally, he cleared his throat. Miss, I do not mean to be forward, and you have every right to tell me it is none of my business, but do you have the funds for 2 weeks at the boarding house? The directness of the question, asked with such genuine concern rather than judgment, brought tears to her eyes despite her best efforts. She shook her head mutely. He nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. I have a proposition for you, and I want you to know I mean no disrespect by it. My ranch, the Double C, it is a good-sized spread. I run cattle, have about 200 head right now. I also have a housekeeper, Mrs. Gonzalez, who is getting on in years. She has been asking me to find her some help. The work would not be too demanding, mostly cooking, some cleaning, maybe helping with the kitchen garden. There is a small room off the back of the house that is currently being used for storage, but it could be cleared out and made comfortable. Room and board plus a small wage. Lily stared at him, trying to process this unexpected offer. Every rule of propriety she had ever been taught screamed that she should refuse, that accepting work at an unmarried man's ranch was scandalous. But propriety had not saved her in St. Louis, and it would not fill her empty stomach now. I do not know what to say, she whispered. You can say yes, and we can load your bag in my wagon and head out there now. You can meet Mrs. Gonzalez, see the place, and decide if it suits you. If it does not, I will bring you back to town tomorrow and help you figure out another solution. Or you can say no, and I will bid you good day, and you will never have to see me again. But miss, and again, I hope I am not speaking out of turn. You look about ready to collapse, and I suspect you could use a hot meal and a safe place to sleep more than you need to worry about what the gossiping biddies in town might say. There was such straightforward kindness in his offer, such lack of artifice, that Lily felt something loosen in her chest. In St. Louis, every interaction had been layered with social calculation and hidden meanings. This man was simply offering help to someone who needed it. Why would you do this for a complete stranger? She asked. Mason met her eyes steadily. Because about 7 years ago, I was nearly dead from a bullet wound, lying in the street in a town not too different from this one. A stranger helped me when he had no reason to. Got me to a doctor, paid for my care, gave me work when I was healed up enough. I would not have the ranch I have now if not for his kindness. Figure I owe it to the universe to pass that along when I can. Lily made her decision. Yes, thank you, Mr. Crawford, I accept your offer. Relief crossed his face. Just call me Mason, miss, and your name? Lily Thornton. Pleased to meet you properly, Miss Thornton. My wagon is just over here. He led her to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 patient-looking horses and helped her up onto the bench seat with a courtesy that reminded her of better days. He placed her carpet bag in the back and climbed up beside her, taking the reins with easy competence. As they rolled out of town, Lily took in her surroundings with new eyes. The mountains were truly spectacular, their peaks still holding patches of snow even in late summer. The valley spread out before them, golden with late-season grasses, dotted here and there with stands of cottonwood and aspen. It is beautiful here, she said softly. It is, Mason agreed. Took me a while to see it after I first came out here. I was pretty bitter in those days, angry at the world. But this place has a way of getting under your skin, making you appreciate what you have instead of dwelling on what you lost. What did you lose, if you do not mind my asking? He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. "My family, my father and older brother. They were killed during the war. Mother passed from grief not long after. I was only 16 then, too young to fight in the war but old enough to feel like I should have been there, should have protected them somehow. Spent a few years making bad decisions and getting into worse trouble before I ended up shot in that street I mentioned. Sometimes I think that bullet saved my life in more ways than one." "I am sorry for your losses," Lily said, and meant it. "Thank you. What about you? What brings a refined lady from St. Louis all the way out here?" Lily hesitated, then decided he had been honest with her, and she owed him the same courtesy. "I was engaged to be married to a man I thought I loved. He was charming, well-connected, everything my parents wanted for me. 2 weeks before the wedding, I discovered him in a compromising position with my closest friend. The scandal was significant. My parents were humiliated. My father suggested I might want to make myself scarce for a while, and conveniently my cousin Martha had written about the need for a schoolteacher out here. My parents provided the funds for my passage, and here I am." "Their loss," Mason said simply. "Man who would treat you that way was not worth having anyway." The straightforward validation, free of pity or judgment, made Lily's throat tight. "Thank you for saying that." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking rhythmically, the horses' hooves raising small puffs of dust from the dry road. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "There it is," Mason said, pointing ahead. "The double C." Lily looked where he indicated and saw a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley between two gentle rises. The main house was a solid log structure with a wide porch, smoke curling from its chimney. Nearby stood a large barn, several corrals, and a few smaller outbuildings. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, a working ranch rather than a gentleman's hobby. As they drew closer, Lily could see chickens pecking in a yard, a cow grazing in a nearby pasture, and a large garden plot showing the remnants of summer vegetables. It looked like a home, she thought, something she had not had in a very long time. A small, round woman emerged from the house as they pulled up, wiping her hands on her apron. Her weathered brown face broke into a smile when she saw Mason. "Senor Mason, you are back, and you have brought a guest." Her dark eyes were curious but friendly as she looked at Lily. Mason climbed down and came around to help Lily from the wagon. "Mrs. Gonzalez, this is Miss Lily Thornton. Miss Thornton, this is Mrs. Gonzalez, who keeps this place running despite my best efforts to create chaos." The older woman laughed and swatted at him with her apron. "You are not so bad, senor. A little messy sometimes, but not so bad." She turned to Lily with warm interest. "Welcome, Miss Thornton. Please come inside. You look tired from traveling." Miss Thornton's cousin was Martha Pemberton, Mason explained as they walked toward the house. "She came out here to teach school, but when she arrived, she learned about the fever. She has nowhere to stay, and I thought maybe she could be that help you have been asking for. Mrs. Gonzalez's expression shifted immediately to sympathy and understanding. "Oh, you poor child. Yes, yes, come in, we will get you settled. There is stew on the stove and fresh bread. You must be hungry." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, clean and well-organized despite Mason's self-deprecating comments. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace at one end and a sturdy table surrounded by chairs. Doorways led off to what Lily assumed were bedrooms. Everything was simple but well-made, built to last. "Sit, sit," Mrs. Gonzalez urged, pulling out a chair at the table. "I will bring you food." Lily sank into the chair gratefully, suddenly aware of just how exhausted she was. Mason took the seat across from her, stretching out his long legs with a sigh. "It has been a long day," he said. "Went into town for supplies and came back with a new employee, not quite what I had planned." "If you have changed your mind," Lily began, suddenly uncertain. "No," he said quickly. "That is not what I meant. I am glad you are here, just remarking on how life has a way of surprising you." Mrs. Gonzalez placed a bowl of rich, fragrant stew in front of Lily, along with a thick slice of bread and butter. "Eat, child. You are too thin." The first bite was heaven. Lily had not realized how hungry she was until the food was in front of her, and she had to force herself to eat slowly, to maintain some semblance of manners. Both Mason and Mrs. Gonzalez tactfully busied themselves with other things, giving her privacy to eat without being watched. When she had finished, feeling more human than she had in days, Mrs. Gonzalez showed her to the small room Mason had mentioned. It was indeed full of storage items, boxes and old furniture, but it had a window with a view of the mountains and enough space for a bed and a small dresser. "We will clean this out tomorrow," Mrs. Gonzalez said. "Tonight you will sleep in my room. I have 2 beds and you need rest." "I could not impose," Lily protested. "You could and you will," the older woman said firmly. "Come, I will show you where you can wash up." That night, lying in the comfortable bed in Mrs. Gonzalez's neat room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling down for the night, Lily felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. It was fragile and tentative, but it was there. She had arrived with nowhere else to go, and a rancher she had just met had said, in effect, "This is your home too." Maybe, just maybe, she could build a new life here. The next morning, Lily woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and the smell of coffee. Pale dawn light filtered through the window, and she could hear Mrs. Gonzalez moving around in the kitchen. She rose quickly, embarrassed to have slept while others were already working, and dressed in her other dress, only slightly less wrinkled than the one she had worn yesterday. When she emerged from the bedroom, Mrs. Gonzalez looked up from the stove with a smile. "Good morning, child. You slept well." "Very well, thank you. I apologize for sleeping so late." "Late?" Mrs. Gonzalez laughed. "The sun is barely up. Señor Mason has been out with the cattle since before dawn, but that is his way. Come, have some breakfast, and then we will work on your room." Over a breakfast of eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits that rivaled anything Lily had eaten in St. Louis, Mrs. Gonzalez explained the rhythms of the ranch. Mason rose before dawn most days to check on the cattle and horses. He employed 2 ranch hands, brothers named Tom and Will Cassidy, who lived in the bunkhouse and helped with the heavy work. Mrs. Gonzalez handled the cooking and cleaning, the chickens and the garden, and general household management. "He is a good man, Señor Mason," Mrs. Gonzalez said as they began clearing boxes out of the small room. "When he hired me 3 years ago, my husband had just died, and I had no money, no way to support myself. He gave me a home and work when no one else would hire an old Mexican woman. He does not care about such things, about where people come from or what they look like. He cares if they are honest and work hard. He seems very kind," Lily agreed, wrestling a heavy box toward the door. "Here, let me take that." Mason's voice startled her, and she turned to find him standing in the doorway, his shirt already dusty from the morning's work. "That is too heavy for you." He lifted the box easily and carried it out. For the next hour, he helped them clear the room, moving furniture and boxes as if they weighed nothing, while Lily and Mrs. Gonzalez sorted through items and swept away years of accumulated dust. By mid-morning, the room was empty and clean. Mason had brought in a bed frame and mattress from one of the other buildings, along with a dresser and a small table that could serve as a desk. "It is not much," he said, looking around the small space, but it is yours for as long as you want it." "It is perfect," Lily said honestly. After sharing a room with two sisters for most of her childhood, then living under her parents' scrutinizing eyes, the idea of having her own space, however small, felt like luxury. Over the following days, Lily settled into the rhythms of ranch life. She helped Mrs. Gonzalez with the cooking, learning to make simple, hearty meals suited to feeding working men. She gathered eggs from the chickens, weeded the garden, and learned to bake bread in the temperamental wood stove. The work was physically demanding in ways her life instinct. Louis had never been, but she found she did not mind. There was a satisfaction in seeing the tangible results of her labor, in sitting down to a meal she had helped prepare. Mason was a quiet presence, often gone for long hours working on various parts of the ranch, but when he was at the house, Lily found herself increasingly aware of him. The way he always removed his hat when speaking to her or Mrs. Gonzalez. The gentle way he handled the horses and even the cattle. The dry humor that surfaced when he was relaxed, usually during evening meals when the day's work was done. "Miss Thornton," he said one evening about a week after her arrival, "I was wondering if you might do me a favor. Of course, if I am able. I have been working on the ranch accounts, trying to make sense of my ledgers. Writing was never my strong suit, and my penmanship is barely legible. I was wondering if you might be willing to help me organize things, maybe write up some correspondence I have been putting off. I would pay you extra for the time, of course." "I would be happy to help," Lily said, "and there is no need for extra payment. You have already been more than generous." "Your work deserves fair compensation," he said firmly. "We can discuss terms." That night after Mrs. Gonzalez had retired to her room, Mason spread out his ledgers on the kitchen table. Lily sat across from him, a lamp between them casting warm light over the pages, and began to make sense of his records. His penmanship was indeed challenging, but his record-keeping showed a sharp mind for business. He knew exactly how many head of cattle he owned, what he had paid for feed and supplies, what prices he had gotten at market. "You have built a successful operation here," Lily observed, tallying a column of numbers. "It has taken years, but yes, it is doing well. Better than I ever expected when I started with just 20 head of cattle and more hope than sense." He paused, watching her work. "You have a fine hand with writing, very elegant." "Years of practice," Lily said, feeling unexpectedly pleased by the compliment. "My mother insisted all her daughters learn proper penmanship. It was one of the many accomplishments necessary for catching a husband." She could not quite keep the bitterness from her voice. "Seems to me it is an accomplishment that has value beyond that," Mason said quietly. "You could teach, keep records, write letters for folks who cannot. That is worth something real." Their eyes met across the table, and Lily felt something shift in the air between them, a awareness that had been building since she arrived but which she had been determinedly ignoring. Mason cleared his throat and looked back down at the ledger. "There is a letter I need written to a buyer in Denver," he said. "Would you mind?" "Not at all." They worked together in comfortable silence, the only sounds the scratch of the pen on paper and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Outside, coyotes yipped in the distance, a sound that had frightened Lily when she first arrived but which now seemed as natural as birdsong. When the work was done and Lily rose to retire for the night, Mason stood as well, the manners of an earlier era evident despite his rough rancher's clothing. "Thank you for your help tonight," he said. "It is nice to have someone to talk to in the evenings. It can get lonely out here." "Thank you for giving me a place to stay," Lily replied. "I truly do not know what I would have done if you had not made your offer that day." "I am glad I did," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her heart beat a little faster. As summer faded into autumn, Lily's life took on a pattern she had never expected but found deeply satisfying. Her hands, once soft and carefully maintained, developed calluses from work. Her skin, despite her best efforts with bonnets, took on a golden tone from the sun. She learned to read the weather by watching the mountains, to tell when the cattle were restless before a storm, to coax the temperamental stove into cooperation. She also learned about Mason Crawford in small increments, details revealed during evening work sessions or casual conversations over meals. He was 32 years old, 12 years her senior, but somehow it did not seem to matter. He had been running the Double C for 7 years, building it from almost nothing into a prosperous ranch. He loved the land with a fierce passion, but was not blind to its dangers and difficulties. He read voraciously, borrowing books from the small library in town whenever he went for supplies, and their evening work sessions often dissolved into discussions of whatever novel or newspaper he had brought back. "You should come to town with me next time," he said one morning in late September as he prepared for a supply run. "You have been here over a month and have not left the ranch once. Mrs. Gonzalez could use some help choosing fabric for new curtains, and I am sure you could use a change of scenery." Lily hesitated. She had been content in her isolation, away from the judging eyes and wagging tongues that had driven her from St. Louis, but she could not hide forever. "All right," she agreed. "I will come." The trip to Veta felt different this time, riding beside Mason on the wagon bench, watching the familiar landscape roll past. When they arrived in town, Lily noticed immediately that they were drawing stairs. A young woman, unchaperoned except for a rancher, riding through town as if it were perfectly normal. She lifted her chin and ignored the looks. At the general store, Mrs. Chen, the proprietor's wife who had been in St. Louis and knew quality when she saw it, greeted Lily with reserved politeness. "Miss Thornton, is it not? We heard you were staying at the Double C." "Yes, I work for Mr. Crawford as a housekeeper," Lily said clearly, meeting the woman's gaze steadily. "I see." Mrs. Chen's expression was carefully neutral, but Lily could read the speculation in her eyes. Mason, who had been examining tools on the other side of the store, appeared at Lily's elbow. "Mrs. Chen, Miss Thornton is helping us select fabric for some curtains. Could you show her what you have available?" The use of "us" was deliberate, Lily knew, a way of indicating that she was part of his household under his protection. Mrs. Chen's expression shifted slightly, became a degree warmer. "Of course, Mr. Crawford. Right this way, Miss Thornton." They left town an hour later, the wagon loaded with supplies and several yards of cheerful yellow fabric for the kitchen curtains. As they headed back toward the ranch, Mason said, "I apologize if that was uncomfortable for you. Small towns can be harsh on anyone they see as different." "It was fine," Lily said. "I have survived worse than a few curious looks. Still, I know how people talk. If you would prefer, I can have Mrs. Gonzalez come to town with me next time instead." "No," Lily said firmly. "I will not hide as if I have done something wrong. I work honestly for honest wages. If people choose to think ill of that, it is their problem, not mine." Mason's face broke into a grin. "There is the spirit. I knew you had steel in you from the first moment I met you. Oh, and what gave me away? The fact that you were still standing upright after what had to have been one of the worst days of your life. A lesser person would have crumbled, but you were trying to figure out your next step. That takes strength." His words warmed her more than any compliment about her appearance or accomplishments ever had. In St. Louis, she had been valued for her pretty face, her family connections, her ability to play the piano and make polite conversation. Here, she was valued for her strength, her competence, her willingness to work hard. October brought the first snows, light dustings that melted by afternoon but promised heavier storms to come. Mason began the work of moving the cattle to lower pastures, long days in the saddle that left him exhausted at dinner. Lily found herself watching for his return each evening, listening for the sound of his horse, relaxing only when she knew he was safely back. One evening he came in later than usual, moving stiffly. Mrs. Gonzalez had already retired for the night, and Lily was alone in the kitchen, keeping his dinner warm. "Rough day?" she asked as he sank into a chair with a groan. One of the steers decided to make a break for freedom. "Took 3 hours to track him down in the hills. I'm getting too old for this kind of nonsense." "You are hardly old," Lily said, setting a plate of food in front of him. "Though you look exhausted." "I am," he admitted, picking up his fork. "But the work does not stop just because I am tired." "You push yourself too hard," says the woman who was up before dawn this morning making pies. "That is different." "How so?" Lily paused, considering. "I suppose it is not. We both work hard." "We do," Mason agreed. "But at least we work for ourselves, not to please some society that does not care if we live or die as long as we follow their rules." It was the most directly he had ever referenced their shared experience of being judged and found wanting by the conventional world. Lily sat down across from him, watching him eat. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Choosing this life instead of something easier?" "Not once," he said without hesitation. "Do you?" "Regret coming here?" "No," Lily said, and realized it was true. "I thought I would miss St. Louis, the parties, and the society, but I do not. I do not miss the constant performance, always having to be the perfect daughter, the perfect lady. Here I can just be Lily." Mason met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her breath catch. "I am glad you are here, Lily. I know that is probably improper for me to say, but it is true. This place feels more like a home since you arrived." "Mason," she began, then stopped, not sure what she wanted to say. The moment stretched between them, full of words unspoken and feelings acknowledged but not yet voiced. Then Mason cleared his throat and looked back down at his plate. "I should finish eating and get to bed. Early start again tomorrow." "Of course," Lily said, rising from the table. "Good night, Mason." "Good night, Lily." In her small room, Lily lay awake for a long time, thinking about the look in Mason's eyes, the warmth in his voice when he said her name. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have frightened her, given her history, but instead it felt right. Mason was nothing like her former fiancé, nothing like the shallow men who had courted her in St. Louis. He was honest and hardworking, kind without being weak, strong without being cruel. The question was, did he feel the same way? And if he did, what would it mean for both of them? November brought heavy snows and cold winds that howled down from the mountains. The work became focused on survival, on keeping the livestock fed and watered, the house warm, the paths clear. Lily learned to dress in layers, to move quickly from house to barn to chicken coop and back, to appreciate the warmth of the kitchen stove like never before. One morning, Tom Cassidy, one of the ranch hands, appeared at the kitchen door looking worried. "Miss Thornton, is Mason here?" "No, he rode out to check the north pasture." "Why, what is wrong?" "My brother went out early to break ice on the water trough and has not come back. That was 2 hours ago. I am worried something happened." Lily did not hesitate. "Saddle me a horse. We will go look for him." Tom looked uncertain. "Maybe we should wait for Mason." "If Will is hurt and freezing, we do not have time to wait. Saddle the horse, Tom. I can ride." It was a slight exaggeration. Lily had taken riding lessons in St. Louis, sedate trots through parks on well-mannered horses. But she had watched Mason and the ranch hands enough to understand the basics, and determination made up for lack of experience. 10 minutes later, she was mounted on a sturdy mare named Bella, following Tom through the snow toward the north pasture. The cold bit at her face despite her scarf, and the wind made her eyes water, but she kept going. They found Will about a mile from the house, lying in the snow beside the frozen creek, his horse standing nearby. "Will!" Tom leaped from his horse and ran to his brother. Lily dismounted more carefully and knelt beside them. Will was conscious but clearly in pain, his face pale and his right leg bent at an unnatural angle. "Horse spooked at something," Will gasped. "Through me. Think my leg is broken." "We need to get you back to the house," Lily said, trying to remember everything she had ever heard about dealing with injuries. "Tom, can we use your jacket to stabilize his leg before we move him?" Working together, they managed to fashion a makeshift splint and get Will onto his horse, Tom riding behind him to hold him steady. Lily led the way back, praying they would make it before Will went into shock. They met Mason halfway back, and the relief on his face when he saw her was palpable. "What happened?" he demanded, taking in the situation at a glance. "Will broke his leg," Lily explained quickly. "We found him by the creek." Mason took charge immediately, helping get Will back to the house and settled on the sofa. Lily heated water and found clean cloths while Mason sent Tom to town for the doctor. "That was brave," Mason said quietly as they waited for the doctor to arrive, "but also dangerous. You could have been hurt." "So could Will, and he was hurt," Lily replied. "I could not just leave him out there." "I know. I am not criticizing, just worried. I would not want anything to happen to you." The doctor arrived and set Will's leg, pronouncing that he would heal but needed to stay off it for at least 6 weeks. Tom helped his brother to the bunkhouse, leaving Mason and Lily alone in the kitchen. "You are shaking," Mason observed. Lily looked down at her hands and saw he was right. The fear and adrenaline that had kept her going were fading, leaving her trembling. "I suppose I am." Without a word, Mason pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest. Lily stiffened in surprise, then relaxed into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "You scared me," he murmured into her hair. "When Tom said you had gone out looking for Will, I imagined all sorts of terrible things." "I know you can take care of yourself, but Lily, I care about you. More than I should, probably." Lily pulled back just enough to look up at him. "More than you should, you work for me. It is not appropriate for me to have these feelings. What if I have the same feelings?" Lily asked, her heart pounding. "What if I have been falling in love with you since the day we met?" Mason's eyes widened. "Lily, I know it is fast, and I know my judgment has been poor in the past, but this feels different. You are different. When I am with you, I feel like myself, like the best version of myself. You make me want to be brave and strong and honest." "You already are all those things," Mason said, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "You were those things before you met me. I just gave you a place where you could be yourself without apology." "Then you understand," Lily said. "You understand what it is like to have to hide parts of yourself to fit in, to meet expectations that do not match who you really are." "I do," Mason agreed. "And Lily, I have been in love with you for weeks now. I just did not think I had the right to say anything. You are young and beautiful and educated. You could have anyone you wanted once word got around that you were available. Some wealthy rancher or businessman who could give you the kind of life you were raised for." "I do not want that life," Lily said firmly. "I want this life. I want the chickens and the garden and the endless laundry and the accounts we work on together at night. I want to wake up to mountain sunrises and fall asleep to coyote songs. I want you, Mason Crawford, exactly as you are." He kissed her then, a gentle meeting of lips that sent warmth flooding through her body despite the cold of the house. It was nothing like the polite, passionless kisses her former fiancé had bestowed on her. This was real and alive and full of promise, When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "I do not have much to offer you except hard work and a simple life." "That is everything I want," Lily assured him. "Then will you marry me, Lily Thornton? Will you be my wife, my partner, my companion in this adventure?" "Yes," Lily said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 3 weeks later, just before Christmas, in the small church in Veta. Mrs. Gonzalez stood as witness, along with Tom and Will Cassidy, who hobbled in on his crutches. The ceremony was simple, the church cold despite the wood stove. But when Lily spoke her vows and looked into Mason's eyes, she felt a warmth and certainty she had never experienced before. Mrs. Chen from the general store had helped her alter one of her better dresses from St. Louis, adding some lace that made it suitable for a wedding. Mason wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. He looked impossibly handsome, and when he slipped a simple gold band on her finger, Lily felt like the luckiest woman alive. The dinner afterward at the ranch was a feast. Mrs. Gonzalez had outdone herself with roasted chicken, vegetables from the root cellar, fresh bread, and a cake that was a work of art. They ate and laughed and celebrated, and when the Cassidy brothers and Mrs. Gonzalez finally left them alone, Mason carried Lily over the threshold of what was now their bedroom, the master bedroom he had been using alone for years. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a discovery of each other that left Lily breathless and amazed. This was what love was supposed to be, she thought as she lay in Mason's arms afterward, listening to his heartbeat. Not the calculated arrangement her parents had pushed for, but this genuine connection, this partnership of equals. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Mason replied, his arms tightening around her. "Thank you for saying yes to a dusty rancher with more cattle than sense. Thank you for seeing me that day in town, for offering me a home when I had nowhere else to go. This will always be your home," Mason promised. "For as long as we both live, this is your home, Lily Crawford." Winter deepened, and Lily settled into her new role as wife and partner. Mrs. Gonzalez had decided to retire and move to town to live with her daughter, leaving Lily as the sole woman of the house. It was daunting at first, managing everything on her own, but Lily discovered reserves of competence she had not known she possessed. She learned to manage the household accounts, to plan meals a week in advance, to preserve and store food for the long winter months. She helped Mason with ranch paperwork, writing correspondence to buyers and suppliers in her elegant hand. She even learned to assist with some of the lighter ranch work, feeding chickens and gathering eggs, tending the horses, helping with the endless task of mucking out stalls. The evenings were her favorite time, when the work was done and she and Mason could sit together by the fire, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's company. Sometimes they worked on the accounts together. Sometimes Mason taught her to play chess, a game he had learned from the man who saved him years ago. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. In February, Lily woke one morning feeling queasy. She attributed it to something she had eaten, but when the feeling persisted for several days, a suspicion began to form. She waited another week before saying anything to Mason, wanting to be certain. "I think I am with child," she told him one evening, her heart racing with a mixture of joy and nervousness. Mason's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, joy, fear, and finally settling on a huge grin. "Truly, I believe so. All the signs are there." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop before she got dizzy. "We are going to be parents," he said, his voice full of wonder. I am going to be a father. Are you happy? Lily asked, needing to hear him say it. Happy does not begin to cover it, Mason said. I am overjoyed, terrified but overjoyed. A baby, Lily, our baby. The next months passed in a blur of preparation. Mason built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Lily sewed tiny clothes, marveling at how small they were. They turned the small room that had been Lily's when she first arrived into a nursery, painting it a cheerful yellow and filling it with everything a baby might need. The ranch thrived under their joint care. With Lily managing the household side and Mason handling the cattle and land, they made a formidable team. They hired a new hand to help the Cassidy brothers, a young man named Sam who was quiet but hardworking. In late September, as the aspen trees turned gold on the mountainsides, Lily went into labor. Mason sent Sam racing to town for the doctor and the midwife while he stayed with Lily, holding her hand and trying not to panic. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. But finally, as the sun rose over the mountains, their son was born, a healthy baby with dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly, judging by his cries. He is perfect, Mason said, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. Lily, he is absolutely perfect. He looks like you, Lily observed, exhausted but happy. He has your nose, Mason countered. They named him Matthew, after Mason's father, and Charles after the man who had saved Mason's life all those years ago. Matthew Charles Crawford, born September 24, 1878, at the Double C Ranch. The years that followed were full of hard work and deep joy. Matthew grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious little boy who followed his father everywhere, wanting to help with everything. When Matthew was 3, Lily gave birth to a daughter they named Lucy, a tiny thing with auburn hair like her mother and her father's golden brown eyes. The ranch continued to prosper. Mason expanded the herd, improved the breeding stock, and built a reputation for quality cattle that brought buyers from as far as Denver. Lily managed the household and the accounts, raised their children, and somehow still found time to help with the ranch work she had come to love. They faced challenges, of course. A drought one summer that had them hauling water from the creek. A winter so harsh they lost a dozen head of cattle. The usual illnesses and injuries that came with ranch life. But they faced everything together, partners in every sense of the word. When Matthew was 7 and Lucy 4, Lily discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, and she spent the last months on bed rest, frustrated at her inability to help around the ranch. But Mason was patient and kind, hiring temporary help to manage the household and bringing her everything she needed. Their second daughter was born in May 1885, a tiny red-headed firecracker they named Lily Elizabeth, after her mother and Mason's mother. Little Lily, as they called her to avoid confusion, was the baby of the family and spoiled accordingly by her older siblings. One evening, when Matthew was 10, Lucy 7, and little Lily 3, the family sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. The children were playing a game with pebbles while Mason and Lily sat on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever think about that day we met?" Mason asked. "When you stepped off the stagecoach looking lost and terrified?" "I think about it often," Lily said. "I was so scared, so certain my life was over, and then you appeared and offered me hope when I had none." "I was scared too," Mason admitted. "Not of you, but of what I was feeling. I looked at you and knew somehow that you were going to change my life." "We changed each other's lives," Lily corrected. "You gave me a home and purpose. I gave you a family and love. We built this together." "That we did," Mason agreed, pulling her closer. "Best decision I ever made, asking you to come home with me that day. Best decision I ever made was saying yes." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. The chickens roosting, the horses moving in the barn, the distant lowing of cattle. It was the song of home, Lily thought, the soundtrack to a life she would not trade for anything. Matthew looked up from his game and called out, "Mama, Papa, watch this." He proceeded to build an elaborate tower with the pebbles that promptly fell over, making Lucy giggle. "Very impressive, son," Mason called back, his voice warm with affection and amusement. "When I grow up, I am going to run the whole ranch," Matthew announced proudly. "Papa says I have a good head for cattle." "You do," Mason confirmed, "but there is still a lot to learn." "I know." "I will learn everything." Little Lily toddled over to the porch, her arms up. "Up, Papa, one up." Mason scooped her into his lap, and she settled against his chest with a contented sigh. Within minutes, she was asleep, her red curls bright against his dark shirt. "She has you wrapped around her little finger," Lily observed with a smile. "Both my girls do," Mason said, leaning over to kiss his wife's temple. "All three of them, actually, if we are being honest." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the family moved inside. Mason carried sleeping Lily to her bed while the older children got ready for sleep. Lily tucked Matthew and Lucy in, listening to their prayers and kissing their foreheads. Later, in their own room, Mason and Lily prepared for bed. Lily sat at her dressing table, brushing out her hair, and caught Mason's eye in the mirror. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How lucky I am," he said simply. "I have a beautiful wife who I love more every day, 3 healthy children, a successful ranch, and a life beyond anything I could have imagined in my younger days." "I feel the same way," Lily said, setting down her brush and moving to sit beside him on the bed. "Sometimes I think about what my life would have been like if Martha had not died, if I had become the school teacher as planned. I probably would have been content enough, but I never would have had this. I never would have had you." "I think we were meant to find each other," Mason said, taking her hand. "Call it fate or providence or just dumb luck, but you and I were meant to be together." "I believe that too." They lay down together, fitting together as naturally as they had from the first night. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines and the mountains stood silent guard over the valley. Inside, the Crawford family slept peacefully, safe and warm and loved. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing of their children. Matthew grew tall and strong, with his father's build and his mother's sharp mind. He took to ranching naturally, learning everything Mason could teach him about cattle and horses and land management. By the time he was 15, he was doing a man's work and doing it well. Lucy was quieter than her siblings, a dreamer who loved books and nature. She spent hours exploring the mountains, collecting wildflowers and sketching the animals she saw. Lily encouraged her artistic bent, ordering art supplies from catalogs and helping her develop her talent. Little Lily lived up to her fiery hair, a whirlwind of energy and opinions who kept everyone on their toes. She was fearless, climbing trees and riding horses from an early age, determined to keep up with her older brother no matter what he was doing. In 1895, when Matthew was 17, Lucy 14, and Lily 10, tragedy struck. A late spring storm brought lightning that started a fire in the hay barn. The entire family, along with the ranch hands, fought the blaze through the night, finally getting it under control before it spread to the other buildings or the house. Standing in the smoking ruins the next morning, exhausted and covered in soot, Mason surveyed the damage. The barn was a total loss along with most of their hay stores, It was a significant setback, but not a fatal one. "We will rebuild," he said, his arm around Lily's waist. "It will set us back, but we will be all right." "I know we will," Lily said. "We have been through worse and survived." The whole family pitched in to rebuild. Matthew worked alongside his father and the hired hands, while Lucy and young Lily helped their mother organize meals and supplies for the workers. The community came together too, neighbors appearing with tools and materials and labor. It was the way of the West, everyone helping everyone else because you never knew when you might need help yourself. By summer, the new barn was complete, bigger and better than the old one. Matthew had contributed several design ideas that made it more efficient, and Mason was proud to give his son credit for the improvements. "You have a good head on your shoulders, son," he said as they stood admiring the finished structure. "This ranch will be in good hands when I am gone." "That is not going to be for a long time yet," Matthew said firmly. "You are only 52, Papa. You have got years and years left." Mason smiled at his son's certainty, but privately he was aware that ranching was hard work and the years were beginning to catch up with him. His joints ached on cold mornings, and he tired more easily than he used to. But he was not ready to slow down yet, not while there was work to be done and a family to provide for. That fall, Lucy announced that she wanted to attend the normal school in Denver to become a teacher. It would mean being away from the ranch for months at a time, living in the city, experiencing a completely different world. Lily and Mason discussed it at length, weighing the risks and benefits. "I want her to have opportunities," Lily said. "To be able to choose her own path in life, not have it chosen for her by circumstance or necessity." "I agree," Mason said, "but Denver is a big city and she is only 14. Nearly 15, and she is smart and capable. We have raised her to be independent." "Maybe too independent," Mason said with a rueful smile. "But yes, you are right. If this is what she wants, we should support her." They gave Lucy their blessing, and she left for Denver in September 1896, tearful but excited. Her letters home were full of wonder at the city, the school, the new friends she was making. She was thriving, and while Lily missed her desperately, she was proud of her daughter's courage. With Lucy away at school and Matthew taking on more responsibility for the ranch, young Lily often found herself at loose ends. At 11 years old, she was too old for childish games but too young to be much help with the serious work. Lily found her daughter in the barn one afternoon, sitting in the hayloft with tears streaming down her face. "Sweetheart, what is wrong?" Lily climbed up to sit beside her youngest child. "I do not fit anywhere," young Lily said miserably. "Lucy is smart and talented and off having adventures in Denver. Matthew is practically running the ranch with Papa, and I am just here, not good at anything." "That is not true," Lily said firmly, pulling her daughter close. "You are good at many things. You are brave and strong and determined. You have a kind heart and a fierce spirit." "But what is that worth?" young Lily asked. "I cannot cook like you or manage accounts. I am not artistic like Lucy or good with cattle like Matthew. What am I supposed to do with my life?" It was such an echo of Lily's own feelings at 18, standing lost and uncertain in Veta, that her heart ached for her daughter. "When I was your age, I thought my whole life was mapped out for me," Lily said. "I would learn to be a proper lady, marry well, have children, and spend my days making polite conversation at tea parties. It seemed like such a narrow, suffocating existence, but I thought that was all there was for someone like me. But then you came here and married Papa and built this whole life," young Lily said. "Exactly. And I could not have imagined this life when I was your age. I could not have conceived of being so happy doing work I once would have considered beneath me. The point is, sweetheart, You do not have to know what you want to do with your life right now. You just have to stay curious, stay open to possibilities, and trust that the right path will reveal itself when you are ready. Young Lily leaned against her mother's shoulder. Do you really believe that? I do. Look at your father. He thought his life was over after his family died and he got shot. But then he found this land and built the double C and eventually found me. Our lives rarely go the way we expect, but if we are brave and willing to take chances, they can turn out even better than we imagined. I will try to be brave, young Lily promised. You already are, Lily assured her. You are my daughter after all. In 1897, Lucy returned home for the summer break, full of stories about Denver and her studies. At 16, she had matured significantly, poised and confident in a way that made Lily's heart swell with pride. She had also met a young man, the son of a prominent Denver family, who was courting her with her parents' permission. His name is Robert Harrison, Lucy told her parents shyly. He is studying law. He is very kind and respectful, and he loves art as much as I do. We visit museums together. Mason was immediately suspicious in the way of all fathers when boys show interest in their daughters. What are his intentions, Papa? Lucy protested, blushing. We have only been keeping company for a few months. It is not serious yet. But it might become serious, Mason said. And I want to meet this young man before it does. Robert Harrison visited the ranch in August, a well-dressed young man with polite manners and genuine interest in ranch life. Mason put him to work, testing him with various tasks around the ranch. To Robert's credit, he did not complain, even when mucking out stalls clearly tested the limits of his enthusiasm. He is soft, Mason said to Lily that night. City-bred and book-learned. He is also clearly in love with our daughter, Lily countered. And more importantly, she is in love with him. Did you see how they look at each other? I saw, Mason grumbled. Still do not have to like it. You did not like me at first either, Lily teased. You thought I was too refined and delicate for ranch life. I never thought that. You did. Mrs. Gonzalez told me. You told her I would probably last a week before running back to civilization. Mason had the grace to look embarrassed. Well, I was clearly wrong. You proved to be tougher than I ever imagined. Maybe Robert will surprise you too. Besides, Lucy is not going to live on the ranch forever. She is going to make her own life, and we should be happy she has found someone who makes her happy. I know, Mason sighed. Does not make it easier, though. Robert returned to Denver at the summer's end, and Lucy went with him to continue her studies. Over the next 2 years, their relationship deepened, and in the spring of 1899, Robert asked Mason for permission to marry Lucy. Mason gave it, though not without making it clear that if Robert ever hurt his daughter, he would answer to an angry rancher with a very long memory. Lucy and Robert were married in June 1899 in a beautiful ceremony in Denver. The whole Crawford family made the trip, staying in a hotel that felt impossibly fancy after ranch life. Matthew, now 21 and every inch a rancher, looked uncomfortable in his suit. Young Lily, 13 and starting to show hints of the beauty she would become, was wide-eyed at the grandeur of the city. "This is where you are from, Mama?" she asked as they walked through Denver's streets. St. Louis was similar, Lily said, big and busy and full of people rushing everywhere. "I do not think I would like it," young Lily decided. "I like being able to see the sky and the mountains." "So do I, sweetheart, so do I." After Lucy's wedding, life at the Double C settled into a new rhythm. Matthew had taken over most of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Mason to step back somewhat, though he still helped with major decisions and the work he enjoyed most. Young Lily, maturing rapidly, began helping her mother more with the household management, and was showing a real talent for the business side of ranching. "She has your head for numbers," Mason observed one evening, watching his youngest daughter work through the account books with the same focused intensity Lily had shown all those years ago. "And your stubborn determination," Lily added with a smile. "She is going to be formidable when she grows up." "She already is," Mason said fondly. In 1902, Lucy and Robert had their first child, a daughter they named Rose. Lily made the trip to Denver to help with the birth and stayed for 2 weeks, reveling in being a grandmother. Holding her tiny granddaughter, she marveled at how much her life had changed since that dusty day in 1877 when she had stepped off the stagecoach with nowhere to go. Back at the ranch, life continued its steady pace. Matthew, at 24, was running the ranch almost entirely on his own now, and doing it well. He had courted and won the heart of a local rancher's daughter, Sarah Mitchell, and they were planning a wedding for the following spring. Young Lily, at 17, was as independent and fierce as ever. She had no interest in the traditional path of finishing school and society, preferring to work alongside her brother on the ranch. She could ride as well as any man, shoot straighter than most, and had opinions on everything from cattle breeding to water rights. "She reminds me of you," Mason told Lily one evening as they watched their youngest daughter ride in from checking the fence line, sitting her horse with easy confidence. "How so?" "I was never that fearless on a horse." "Not that. The way she knows her own mind and is not afraid to speak it. The way she faces the world head-on instead of hiding from it. That is all you." "And you," Lily said. "She gets her courage from both of us." Mason and Lily had grown older together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. Mason was nearly 60 now, his dark hair thoroughly silvered, his face lined by sun and wind and years of hard work. Lily, at 42, had threads of silver in her auburn hair and laugh lines around her eyes. They were not the young people who had fallen in love in this very house 25 years earlier, but their love was stronger and deeper than it had been then. They still sat together on the porch most evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, Mason's arm around Lily's shoulders, talking about everything and nothing. They still worked on the ranch accounts together, though now young Lily often joined them. They still shared the same bed, finding comfort in each other's presence after all these years. "You ever regret it?" Mason asked one night, the question coming out of nowhere. "Giving up the life you could have had for this one?" Lily looked at him in surprise. "Never, not once." "Why would you ask that?" "I do not know. I was just thinking about everything you gave up. The society, the comfort, the ease. You could have married someone wealthy, lived in a mansion, had servants." "I could have," Lily agreed, "and I would have been miserable. Mason, this life, this ranch, you and our children, this is everything I ever wanted even when I did not know I wanted it. You gave me something far more valuable than wealth or status. You gave me purpose and partnership and love. You gave me myself." "I did not give you that," Mason protested. "That was always in you." "Maybe. But you helped me find it. You saw me, really saw me when I was lost and scared and certain my life was over. You offered me a home and told me I belonged here. That is a gift beyond price." Mason pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, Lily Crawford, more now than ever." "I love you too. Always." Matthew and Sarah were married in April 1903, and by the end of the year, Sarah was expecting their first child. The baby, a boy they named Mason Thomas Crawford, was born in July 1904, making Mason and Lily grandparents again. Young Lily, now 19, was fascinated by her nephew and could often be found holding him and talking to him about horses and cattle as if he could understand every word. Lucy and Robert had a second child in 1905, a son they named Thomas. The family gathered for the baptism in Denver, 3 generations of Crawfords together for a brief, chaotic, wonderful weekend. Young Lily surprised everyone in 1906 by announcing that she wanted to attend the agricultural college in Fort Collins. Not to escape ranching, she explained to her worried parents, but to learn how to do it better. They have programs in animal husbandry and land management and all sorts of things that could help the Double C. That is an excellent idea, Lily said, proud of her daughter's ambition and foresight. When would you start? Next fall, if you will let me. Of course we will let you, Mason said. Though we will miss having you around. I will come home for breaks, young Lily promised, and I will use everything I learned to help make this ranch even better. She was true to her word. At the agricultural college, she excelled, her practical experience giving her an advantage over students who only knew ranching from books. She came home during breaks full of new ideas and innovations, some of which Matthew implemented with great success. In 1908, when young Lily was 23, she met a fellow student at the college, a young rancher from Wyoming named David Morrison. He was serious and hardworking, with a deep respect for the land and a progressive approach to ranching that aligned with young Lily's own views. They fell in love over discussions of crop rotation and water conservation, bonding over their shared passion for the ranching life. David came to the Double C to meet the family that summer, and Lily watched with amusement as Mason put him through the same tests he had put Robert through years before. David passed with flying colors, proving he could work as hard as he talked. He is a good man, Mason admitted later. And he clearly loves her. He does, Lily agreed. And she loves him. They are well matched. Young Lily and David were married in the fall of 1909, a simple ceremony at the ranch followed by a celebration that brought together family and friends from across Colorado and Wyoming. Young Lily was a radiant bride, fierce and beautiful in a simple white dress, her red hair crowned with wildflowers from the mountain meadows she loved. As Lily watched her youngest daughter marry and begin her own adventure, she felt a deep sense of contentment. All 3 of her children were settled and happy, building lives that honored their own dreams and values. Lucy was a devoted mother and wife in Denver, using her artistic talents to teach art to underprivileged children. Matthew was running the Double C with skill and innovation, raising his own children to love the land as he did. And young Lily was embarking on a partnership with David, planning to start their own ranch in Wyoming while still maintaining close ties to the Double C. We did well, Mason said, echoing her thoughts as they danced at their daughter's wedding, moving slowly to the music played by a small string band. We did, Lily agreed. 3 good, strong, independent children who know how to work hard and love deeply. We should be proud. I am proud. Of them and of us. Of everything we have built together. The years continued their steady march. Mason and Lily gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, handing over full control to Matthew and Sarah. They remained in the ranch house, now sharing it with Matthew's growing family, which eventually included 4 children. Mason, named for his grandfather, Lily, named for her grandmother James, and little Sarah. Lucy and Robert stayed in Denver, where Robert's law practice thrived and Lucy ran an art school for children. They visited the ranch several times a year, their children growing up with a foot in both worlds, city and country. Young Lily and David built a successful ranch in Wyoming, implementing innovative practices that made them leaders in sustainable ranching. They had 3 children, twins David and Diana, and a younger son named Mason, another namesake to carry on the family legacy. In the spring of 1920, Mason fell ill. It started as a persistent cough that would not go away, then progressed to fever and weakness. The doctor diagnosed pneumonia and did what he could, but Mason was 74 years old and his body was tired from decades of hard work. Lily stayed by his side constantly, leaving only when Matthew or Sarah insisted she rest. She held his hand and talked to him about their life together, all the memories they had accumulated over 43 years of marriage. "You remember the day we met?" She asked him one afternoon when he was more lucid than he had been in days. "Of course," Mason said, his voice weak but clear. "You were standing in front of the general store looking lost and beautiful and so brave even though you were terrified. I knew right then that you were going to change my life." "You changed mine," Lily said, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me everything, Mason. A home, a family, a purpose, love, so much love." "We gave each other those things," Mason corrected gently. "We built this life together, Lily. Every bit of it, and what a life it has been." "I am not ready to let you go," Lily whispered. "I know. I am not ready to go either, but Lily, listen to me. When I am gone, you have to keep living. Keep enjoying the mountains and the sunsets and our grandchildren. Keep helping Matthew run the ranch. Keep being the strong, amazing woman you have always been. Promise me." "I promise," Lily said, though the words felt like they were tearing her apart. Mason died 2 days later, peacefully in his sleep with Lily holding his hand. He was buried on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rising majestically in the background. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testimony to the respect and affection Mason had earned over his years in the valley. Lily grieved deeply, the loss of her partner and love leaving a hole in her life that nothing could fill. But she kept her promise. She stayed active in the ranch's operation, advising Matthew and delighting in her grandchildren. She watched young Mason and Lily grow into capable young people who loved the ranch as much as their father did. She corresponded regularly with Lucy in Denver and young Lily in Wyoming, maintaining the bonds of family across the miles. In the evenings, she often sat on the porch alone, watching the sun set over the mountains, remembering the countless evenings she had sat there with Mason. She could almost feel his arm around her shoulders, hear his voice in the wind through the pines. 5 years after Mason's death, in 1925, Lily's own health began to fail. She was 67 years old and had lived a full, rich life, but her heart was tired. On a beautiful June morning, with the wildflowers blooming in the meadows and the mountains standing guard as they always had, Lily passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was buried next to Mason on the hillside, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names and dates and one line beneath. "Together we built a home." The Double C Ranch continued to thrive under Matthew's stewardship and eventually passed to his son Mason, who ran it with the same dedication and love his grandfather and great-grandmother had shown. Young Lily's ranch in Wyoming became a model of sustainable ranching practices. Lucy's art school in Denver educated generations of children, teaching them to see beauty in the world around them. The story of how Lily Thornton had arrived in Veta with nowhere else to go, and how rancher Mason Crawford had told her this was her home too, became a family legend passed down through the generations. It was a story about courage and kindness, about taking chances and building something beautiful from nothing. It was a story about love, the kind that lasts not just a lifetime but generations. On the hillside where Lily and Mason were buried, wildflowers grew every spring, painting the mountainside in brilliant colors. The ranch they had built together continued to stand as testimony to what two people could create when they chose to face the world together, as partners and equals, bound by love and strengthened by shared purpose. Their descendants scattered across the West, carrying forward the values Lily and Mason had instilled: hard work, kindness to strangers, respect for the land, and above all, the courage to build a life true to your own heart rather than following someone else's script. The mountains remained, eternal and unchanging, witnesses to the human stories that played out in their shadow. The Double C Ranch remained, though it grew and changed with the times, always a home built on the foundation of love and partnership that Lily and Mason had established all those years ago. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun painted the mountains gold and the wind whispered through the pines, it seemed like two figures sat together on the ranch house porch, watching the sunset with arms around each other, well, perhaps that was just the imagination of the living, wishing to glimpse the love that had built such an enduring legacy. Or perhaps love that strong, that true, that deep, never really dies. It just becomes part of the land itself, woven into the very fabric of the place where it flourished, eternal as the mountains, constant as the turning seasons, enduring as the legacy passed from one generation to the next. The end of one story, yes, but also the beginning of countless others, all rooted in that first moment when a dusty, desperate young woman stepped off a stagecoach and a kind rancher offered her not just work, not just shelter, but a home and a future beyond anything she could have imagined. That was the true magic of the West, Lily would have said if anyone had asked. Not the gold rushes or the gunfights or the larger-than-life characters of legend, but the quiet moments of human connection, the small acts of kindness that changed lives, the courage to build something new when the old world had failed you. She had arrived with nowhere else to go, and the rancher had said, "This is your home too." And in saying those words, in making that simple offer of shelter and work and belonging, Mason Crawford had given Lily Thornton something more precious than all the gold in the mountains. A chance to become who she was meant to be, to find the love she was meant to have, to build the life she was meant to live. And she had taken that chance and run with it, transforming herself from a lost girl into a strong woman, from a refugee from scandal into the matriarch of a ranching dynasty, from someone with nowhere to go into someone who had found exactly where she belonged. That was the real story, the one worth telling and retelling, the one that mattered long after the details of daily life had faded from memory. Love and courage and the willingness to start over, to build something new, to believe that tomorrow could be better than yesterday if you were brave enough to work for it. And the Double C Ranch, standing strong in its valley with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains watching over it, was living proof that such courage was not wasted, that such love was not in vain, that such stories did not just have happy endings but happy continuations, rippling forward through time, touching lives yet to come, a legacy of love that would endure as long as the mountains themselves.